Beginning at the 34th verse. When the Pharisees had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked the question to test Jesus. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like to it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments rest all the law and the prophets." Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. In that first set of three pericopes for the year, the ones at the end of the Pentecost season in this first pericope series deal with a number of questions that people asked Jesus. As we said a couple of weeks ago, they're gotcha questions. They were not designed to get any particular information. They were designed, all of them, to trick Jesus, to make him say things that he didn't want to say. And, of course, Jesus is not easily tricked. Now, if you have been following the debates, or if you've been following the political campaigns, the people that interview the candidates are always looking for gotcha questions, something to make them say something that will put them in an advantage or a disadvantage, depending upon who the interrogator is. That's the way this kind of world operates, I guess, but it certainly was very prevalent in Jesus' day. We had the question about, is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? Either question they felt would have got him into some kind of trouble. There was a question about if a man died and his wife remarried, and the law was that if your brother was still single, then he would marry his brother's widow to secure the family tradition. And they asked him if he had 7 brothers and one died after the other, and the woman married all 7, who would be the husband in paradise? And Jesus said, well, people are neither given in marriage, ungiven in marriage in paradise. It's a whole different situation. You don't understand it. Today's another question. They come to Jesus and they say, which commandment or part of the law is the greatest? It seems like a relevant question, doesn't it? And it is not to gain any kind of information. Again, it is to trick Jesus. If he makes a statement that one is more important than the other, then they will accuse him of interfering with the tradition of the church. And if he says he doesn't know, they can easily say, well, you're not very familiar with the law then, are you? But Jesus' statement makes a total different interpretation of how you look at the law. And that's what we want to deal with this morning. Well, how would you answer the questions? The confirmants answered it right. They're the same. They've got the same significance. But we really don't practice it that way, do we? I'm sure that we much rather would skip church and not worship than steal something. One has a secular penalty, the other one doesn't. So, I read a lot of sermons on this text, and one minister said, I would have responded, why are you so stuck in the law? Jesus wouldn't have asked this question because the law was important to him. He said, I came not to destroy the law and the prophets, I came to fulfill them. They're all important. But he reinvented the way they were to be interpreted by saying, the greatest commandment is you shall love the Lord with all your heart and with all your soul. And the second is like unto it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So what he is saying basically is the law is not a scorecard that you keep in your pocket and check off something. There is an underlying philosophy which really interprets the law, and that is the law of love. And if you look at the commandments, rather than something as being restrictive and something that you can't do, look at it as something that will bring you into a perfection in terms of your relationship with your God and with each other. So I want to point out two things this morning that we do in terms of laws. The confirmation, if you're taking notes, this is the first point. Make it easier for you this morning. We constantly try to evaluate and categorize laws and sins or transgressions of the law in some kind of important order. We really believe innately that one is more important than the other. One of the commentators on today's text said if Moses had come off the mountain with the 10 Commandments, he would have been interviewed by a commentator, and the interview had gone something like this. Or at least the posting of the interview would come something like this in the newspaper. Moses came down from the mountain today with 10 commandments from God. We here will evaluate the 3 most important ones. We actually believe that the commandments aren't really equal, at least innately. At least that's the way we act. I told you before of a pastoral call that I made in a couple very early in the ministry. I was called to a house where the woman was threatening to commit suicide. She was an invalid, confined to a wheelchair, and she had a housekeeper, and she had found out that the husband had ended an affair with the housekeeper. And so she threatened to shoot herself. They called me to settle the issue. And one of them said, well, I was told by my parents when I was young that infidelity was one of the worst sins that there was. That was the wife talking. And the husband said, but I was taught when I was young that the worst thing a person could do is kill themselves. What do you think? It wasn't a gotcha question. They really wanted to know. They wanted to settle right there. I said, I don't think either one of them is a particularly good idea. But I said, why don't you go ahead and shoot me, and then I'll absolve that for your husband. Well, she said, I got nothing wrong with I got no problem with you. Yeah, but it's okay because the Bible says it's okay. Well, she said maybe it was a foolish idea. And she gave up the gun. One of the things I have to give credit to the Catholic churches is that they have an ordered set of laws that they teach the people. There are mortal sins and there are venial sins. Some sins are worse than others. And I think really, even though we dispute that, we kind of agree with the concept. Some commandments are just more important than others. In secular laws, we do that too. There's a difference between a misdemeanor and a felony. There is a difference between first and second degree murder. One, we kind of evaluate it on the basis of how bad it is or how bad we think it is. And then secondly, in terms of what the penalty should be. But we really do have in our judicial system a real order of laws. And so when the people came to Jesus and they asked him what was the most important law, they had certain ideas and philosophies that backed up the reason for asking that question. But Jesus transformed the way you look at the law. He said the way to look at the law is that they are all important. And you don't keep a notebook of which ones you kept and which ones you don't. You try and observe all of them because they are a composite of ideas of what it is to be a follower of God's love. See, the Reformation Sunday, we are justified by grace, is not something that was just invented by Luther. He read it out of the Bible from Paul, who had interpreted from his experience with Jesus. We don't keep a track of laws and check them off. We think they're all important because they all point us to what we should be in relationship to God and each other. Once in a while in premarital counseling, ask them to make a contract. And in this contract to say which things are negotiable and which things are non-negotiable. It's a fun exercise. It's a very enlightening one. Because then they start looking at it and saying, which of these is bad enough so I no longer want to love you or live with you? But again, that's not the way to look at the relationship. The relationship is what do we look at in which we can enhance each other and strengthen the relationship and not get to a point where something divides us. So the first point we take from today's lesson is we don't categorize. We don't make one law more important than the other. We use them as a support and a basis to look at what we should be and what we should be doing. Second point is love is not something that you feel. Love is something that you do. When people hear this response of Jesus, they kind of say, are you kidding? Love everybody? Love your neighbor? Well, that's nice in principle, but it's just pie in the sky religion. Nobody can love everybody. By what means am I supposed to feel anything but disrespect, resentment, hate for those miserable people, that lout in the office who always constantly rattles my nerves, that liar who took me in and cheated me last week, that big wheel who came into the neighborhood and is disobeying all the regulations of the organization, the homeowners, that one-time friend who betrayed me. These are serious issues, and I'm supposed to feel good about them? Get real, Jesus. But what if the command to love your neighbor is not on how to feel, but on what you do? And I think this Jesus made very clear. What if Christ never intended us to sit around and manufacture affectionate feeling toward those who bug us and rub us the wrong way? There's no virtue in being fond of someone. And there's not really any vice in not feeling especially fond of somebody. Now that ought to give you some peace today. You can take that home, and you can take it to the bank. Feelings really aren't that important unless they take root in actions. When we have a wedding here, there isn't a person out there, particularly people who have been married, who expect that all the emotional stuff that they're feeling on their wedding day is going to be there 3 years later. They're not just going to feel all that airy and wonderful. Ooh, struck a vein here and there. But that's true. You're going to have times when you really can't stand that person that you said you'd love the rest of your life, but you know that you're going to be faithful and care and treat them if you do like you do. So the first step in Christian love is to recognize that even we don't feel any warmth towards somebody, any particularly fondness, we act as if we did by our actions. I got to tell you, there was a little incident this last week where I picked up on that. And to recognize that sometimes if we're kind to somebody, we begin to like them, even if we didn't like them before. There was a person in a store that I was at this last week who was there with his daughter. And this is going to tell something about my prejudice, but the fellow was covered with tattoos from head to toe. He looked like he'd fallen in an inkwell. And I got to tell you, I started to wonder. I felt sorry for the poor girl. Has his father. And what I did was I opened the door for him when he went out with his daughter. He looked at me and he said, "Thank you, that was very kind." And then the daughter, after they'd gotten out, said, "Why did you thank him?" "Well, he showed you and I respect. And when people do that, you always say thank you." I said, this girl really has a good father, teaching right things. And then I got a call from a pollster. And my immediate response was to say something unkind and to tell him what a dolt I thought he was to be doing this. And then I thought of the sermon. I can't do that. Would you like to take a poll? And I said, I know that you people do a very, very good service to people, and yes, I would like to answer your questions. The only problem I have is you're going to look for yes and no answers. But I'm not going to give them to you. And I'm not trying to be nasty or smart aleck. That's the way I answer questions. And went through a number of questions. And she said then, "How do you feel about Joe Biden?" And I said, "Well, I really don't know the man. I'm sure he's like you and me, that he has many good points and many faults. I grieved with him when he lost his son in the military. I think he's protecting his son when he shouldn't. I've got some judgments. I don't know if they're accurate. I don't have enough proof. But I think he wants to do the right thing." "How do you feel about Donald Trump?" "It's kind of like you and me, isn't he? If you stick him with a pin, he'd bleed. I think he's done some good work. I think he's a little arrogant. That's my judgment. But I don't think he deserves all the criticism he gets. But I don't know him. I would like to talk to him for a while." You didn't check any boxes. But he got to the point where he was just about done, and he said, I've got only 5% of the questions left. But he said, I want to tell you this. You are the nicest human being I've ever talked to. And I said, I've got to tell you that my first reaction when you called was not to be nice. And he said, I would expect you to say that. But let me tell you, you made my day. I don't know if I did or not. But those were two occasions when I was going to do something inconsiderate, nasty. And on those two occasions, I did the right thing. And it was nice. And I got to like both of those people after I'd talked to them when I didn't like them when I met them. Sometimes the best we can do is just be kind. When Jesus told about the last judgment, he didn't say, I was hungry and you felt sorry for me. I was naked and you felt ashamed with me. I was in prison and you felt the shackles on my wrist were painful to you as they were to me. I was sick and you were so sympathetic. Those weren't the words. He said I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was in prison and you visited me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you took care of me. Jesus was in essence saying, don't tell me how you feel about your neighbor. Tell me what you're doing. And as we were reminded on this Reformation Day, we aren't saved by those works. But they are indications that we are interpreting the law the same way that Jesus was. The question wasn't that difficult. But sometimes we make the answers difficult, and they don't need to be. Amen.